Have you ever felt the deep, searing pain of losing someone who was your everything? The one who held your hand through life's ups and downs, who was the foundation of your world. Gone in an instant? How do you pick up the pieces when the person who made you feel whole is suddenly taken from you? In today's video, we will take a heartfelt journey through the emotions of loss, loneliness, and the long road to finding strength in the face of overwhelming grief. This video is more than just about mourning. It's a chance to understand the complex, often silent wounds that come with the death of a loved one. We will explore how we can navigate through the heartache and move toward a place of healing, peace, and purpose once again. By reflecting on life, love, and the inevitable passage of time, we'll discuss how relationships shape us, how the changing seasons of life alter our perceptions, and how, even in our darkest moments, there is always a way forward. Losing someone is an experience that touches us all, no matter our background. But no matter how heavy the pain, it's possible to emerge stronger, with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. Through this emotional reflection, we hope to guide you through the toughest moments and help you find solace in knowing that grief, while incredibly difficult, doesn't have to be an endless cycle of despair. It can be a catalyst for new beginnings, deeper understanding, and growth. If you're new here and haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend doing so and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Your support means the world to me, and if you find this video meaningful, please consider liking it and sharing it with others who may also benefit from these insights. Together, we can spread the message of resilience, hope, and healing. If this video resonates with you and the topic feels meaningful, please comment 1 below to let me know you're with me on this journey. If there's something you'd like to see improved, comment 0 to share your thoughts and help me create better content tailored to your needs. Now, let's dive in and begin this important conversation. Not long after that, my dear wife passed away, leaving a gaping hole in my heart. The days felt longer without her comforting presence, and the house, which once echoed with laughter and warmth, seemed colder, emptier. As if that wasn't enough, my children, consumed by their own busy lives, have moved far away, leaving me to face the growing distance that now exists between us. Occasionally, I get a call from them, moments when their voices ring through the phone, but even then, it feels like they are drifting further out of reach. Each call, no matter how brief, reminds me just how much time has passed and how little I matter in their hectic worlds. In the silence of my home, I can feel their absence deeply. The walls, once filled with the sounds of family, now seem to whisper the stories of a past that is fading away. It's as if time itself is erasing them from my life, and all I have left is a hollow space where they used to be. One evening, the phone rang, and it was my son, Tyler. His voice was rushed, filled with the weight of 1,000 responsibilities. "Dad," he said, almost breathless, "I'm swamped with work tonight and won't be able to come by." "I'm sorry." His apology, though heartfelt, stung deeply. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, but there was nothing I could do to bring him closer. "It's okay," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't worry about it. Take care of your things. I'll be fine." The words felt hollow, and as soon as I hung up, the emptiness in my chest grew unbearable. I looked around at the quiet, empty room, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The silence was suffocating, almost as though it had physically wrapped itself around me, and I struggled to breathe. I felt like a forgotten echo in a vast space. The weight of loneliness pressed down on me, heavier than ever. It was as if my soul was sinking into an abyss, and all I could do was hold on, waiting for something to break the silence. But nothing came. Just the cold stillness, reminding me of all the moments that would never return. The laughter, the shared meals, the conversations. I missed it all. And the realization that I might never have it again was a pain unlike any other. The next day, as I sat in the same empty room, my neighbor, Mr. John, came by for a visit. He walked in with a tired sigh, and I could see the exhaustion etched into his face. "My family's busy too," he said, slumping into a chair. "Everyone's so wrapped up in their own lives. This loneliness, it's unbearable." His words, simple as they were, struck a chord deep within me. They echoed the exact emptiness I had been living with for weeks, a quiet sorrow that gnawed at me, wearing me down. "It's hard," I said quietly, feeling the tears well up inside. "I know exactly what you mean," Mr. John continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his struggles. "We need to think about the future, you know? There may come a time when we're truly all alone, with no one around." His words cut through me like a knife, exposing a fear I hadn't wanted to face. I imagined the days growing longer and lonelier, with no one to share them with. No children to visit, no laughter to fill the silence, just the endless ticking of time, marking the days I would spend alone. The thought felt so overwhelming that it almost suffocated me. The idea of being forgotten, of not mattering to anyone, was a pain so deep that it left me breathless. I couldn't escape the vision of an old man, sitting alone, with nothing but his memories for company. The reality of it seemed too much to bear. A few days later, my daughter Emma came over for a visit, bringing her little boy with her. My heart swelled with excitement at the thought of seeing them, and I rushed to prepare a meal of her favorite childhood dishes, hoping it would be a moment to reconnect, to rekindle the bond that felt so distant now. But when she arrived, there was no time for anything. She barely had time to sit down before she glanced at her watch and sighed. "Sorry, Dad," she said, her voice hurried. "I'm in a rush. I have to pick up my husband from work." My heart sank as I watched her movements, so rushed, so preoccupied with the many things pulling her in different directions. The meal I had so lovingly prepared, the meal that had taken hours, was barely noticed. It felt as though the love I had poured into every dish was consumed in a matter of seconds, with no real appreciation or connection. Before my grandson could even settle in, Emma was already bundling him up, ready to leave. "It's fine, don't worry about it," I said, my voice thick with emotion, though I smiled weakly. "Take care of your priorities. I'll be okay." I wanted to tell her how much I missed her, how much I longed for the days when time seemed endless and we could sit together without hurry. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched her rush out the door, and once again, the silence enveloped me. The house, once again, became a tomb of empty moments, where love and connection felt like distant dreams that I could no longer grasp. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my eyes fixed on the space where my family had just been. The absence of their voices, their laughter, the warmth of their presence. It was suffocating. At that moment, it felt as though pieces of my spirit were being torn away, one by one, leaving behind a hollow shell that seemed to echo with emptiness. The world outside continued its ceaseless march, indifferent to the void I felt inside. But to me, everything had slowed down, and it felt as if I was fading, unnoticed, into the background, like a forgotten shadow swallowed up by the stream of time. That night, the silence of the house was deafening. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the relentless swirl of thoughts that kept pounding in my mind. A single question kept repeating itself over and over, like a haunting refrain. What will I do if I end up truly alone one day? It was a terrifying thought, one I had buried deep inside, refusing to acknowledge. But now, it was impossible to ignore any longer. It wasn't just a passing concern. It was a deep, gnawing fear that had taken root in my heart. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment one below to let me know that you are still here with me. As I tossed and turned, I realized with a shuddering clarity that I couldn't afford to sit idly by and let time slip through my fingers. I couldn't let myself succumb to the slow suffocation of loneliness and resignation. I needed to take control of my future, to prepare not just practically, but emotionally and mentally, for what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. The only person who could ensure my well-being in my later years was me. I could no longer rely on the hope that my family would always be there, that they would somehow find time to care for me as I had cared for them. No, I had to be ready for the possibility that I might one day stand alone, and that realization sent a shiver of dread down my spine. A few days later, feeling a weight in my chest that I couldn't ignore, I reached out to John, an old friend who had always been a steady presence in my life. I invited him to join me for a walk in the park, hoping that the simple act of getting some fresh air would clear my mind. We found a bench beneath the shade of a grand old oak tree, the world around us bustling with life, but somehow it all felt distant, like we were watching it through a foggy window. As we sat there, I felt the heaviness of the air between us. So many things left unsaid, so much uncertainty in my heart. Finally, I summoned the courage to voice the question that had been eating at me. "John," I began, my voice tinged with a vulnerability that had been building inside me. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. As we get older, we might end up living alone. And I have to ask, when that time comes, what should we do?" John paused for a moment. His brow furrowed as he took a deep breath, clearly contemplating the weight of my words. When he finally spoke, his tone was steady, but there was an underlying sadness to it. "You know, I've thought about that too," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The first thing you need to do is make sure you've got enough saved up. You don't want to be struggling when you're older when your body isn't as strong. And, honestly, you can't expect too much from your kids. They've got their own lives, their responsibilities. You can't put the weight of your future on their shoulders. We have to learn to take care of ourselves, to stand on our own 2 feet. His words were blunt, but they hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. It was as though a light had been switched on, casting a harsh reality into sharp focus. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart racing. I had always hoped, in some naive part of me, that my children would be there to support me as I had once supported them. But now, I saw that I had been living in a dream, and that dream was shattering. John's simple yet powerful words were a wake-up call, one that I couldn't ignore any longer. We sat together in the quiet that followed, each of us lost in our thoughts, the weight of the conversation settling in. John's words opened my eyes to a truth I had been too afraid to face. I could no longer rely on distractions to fill the empty spaces in my life. For so long, I had surrounded myself with the noise of TV, the radio, and the comfort of old books. It was easy to slip into that routine, to let the hours pass by without truly living, without facing the reality of what was happening to me. But now, I saw the truth. These distractions weren't helping me. They were just papering over the cracks of loneliness and sadness. And that loneliness, if left unchecked, could slowly eat away at me, both mentally and physically, until I became a shadow of the person I once was. At that moment, I knew I couldn't let that happen. I had to take action, to start planning for my future, not just in terms of money or practical matters, but in terms of emotional resilience. I had to find a way to stand strong, even if the world around me seemed to be fading away. The road ahead was uncertain, but I couldn't afford to let fear keep me stagnant. I had to live, truly live, even if it meant facing some of the hardest truths about aging and solitude. From that moment, something deep within me shifted. I could no longer ignore the emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly before me. I knew I had to make a change. It wasn't easy, and the thought of breaking out of my comfortable routine seemed daunting, but I forced myself to try. I began setting my alarm early each morning and dragging myself out of bed, no matter how tempting it was to stay nestled in the warmth of my blankets. The crisp morning air was refreshing, and though it was a small step, it felt like a powerful one. I made my way to the park, the track still quiet as the world around me slowly woke up. I walked briskly, not pushing myself too hard, but determined to keep moving, to stay active, to breathe in the fresh air that felt so soothing. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a tiny but significant one. And in those early morning moments, I could almost convince myself that life wasn't over, that there was still room for change, room for something good. In the afternoons, I found myself heading to the local community center. The idea of being surrounded by strangers initially filled me with uncertainty, but I knew I needed to push past it. When I walked through those doors, I was greeted with faces just like mine. People who understood. They had known loss, they had walked through their storms, and yet here they were, still moving forward. We sat together, played chess, and shared stories of our lives, our hardships, our joys, and the things that kept us going. There were moments when we even laughed. Genuine, heartfelt laughter that felt like a balm for my weary soul. Slowly, I began to form connections, tiny threads that wove together a new kind of community. With every conversation and every smile, I began to feel a sense of belonging, a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing. Then, the days began to blend into one another. The connections I was making brought light into my life, but when nightfall arrived, the darkness was still there, heavy and unyielding. The silence, the kind that echoed through the empty spaces of my home, would return. It was as though the quiet was a constant reminder of the absence that haunted me. I would sit in my living room, the loneliness pressing in, and it was during one of those quiet evenings that a thought surfaced, unbidden and unexpected. What if I could find someone again? What if I could find love, even at my age? At first, it felt foreign, like a betrayal to Emma, my late wife. The guilt squeezed at my chest, and I struggled with the notion that even thinking about a future with someone else might somehow dishonor her memory. But the truth was undeniable. The idea of facing the rest of my days alone, of experiencing the ups and downs of life without someone by my side, felt unbearable. I was torn and conflicted, but I knew I couldn't continue in solitude. I turned to John, a friend who had become a steady presence in my life. I needed his wisdom, his perspective. When I shared my thoughts with him, he listened without judgment, his expression kind and patient. After a pause, he gave me a reassuring smile, his hand gently placed on my shoulder. "I get it," he said in a soft, understanding voice. When people our age seek companionship, it's not about needing someone to take care of you financially. It's about finding someone to share your life with. You've lived a long time, and the truth is, the presence of another person, someone to talk to, someone to laugh with, someone to just be there, can bring a sense of peace, a sense of warmth that nothing else can. You're not replacing anyone. You're healing, you're finding the comfort and connection that we all need. His words struck me deeply, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace that washed over me. I realized that seeking a partner at this stage wasn't about erasing the past or replacing Emma. Nothing could ever do that. It was about finding someone to share the present with, to create new memories with, and to look toward the future together. It was about healing, about the emotional connection I had so longed for but hadn't dared to seek. The pain of solitude wasn't something I had to endure forever. It could be softened, even healed, by the warmth of another's company. One day, at the community center, I met Emiko. She was an older woman, just like me, living alone while her children worked far away. She had a spirit that radiated energy and warmth. It wasn't long before I noticed how people naturally gravitated toward her, drawn to her infectious laughter and her positive energy. Emiko had an optimism that could light up even the darkest of days. We talked, we laughed, and there was an ease between us as if we had known each other for years. There was something in her presence that made me feel lighter, less burdened by the weight of my loneliness. In her, I found someone who understood what it meant to live with the quiet, the ache of solitude, and yet still carry on with grace, with strength, and with hope. She wasn't just a new friend. She was a reminder that companionship, no matter how late in life, could still be a source of healing and joy. From the very first moment we met, there was an immediate connection between us. It felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together at just the right time. We quickly began sharing stories about our lives, our joys, our heartaches, and perhaps most deeply, the challenges of aging. I found in Emiko someone who truly understood the complexity of growing older, the quiet fears, and the moments of loneliness that often accompany it. Before long, we had exchanged phone numbers, and that was the beginning of something so simple, yet so profound. We spent more and more time together, filling our days with small but meaningful pleasures. Long walks through the park, visits to the bustling local market, and afternoons spent in the kitchen, cooking meals that somehow tasted better when prepared together. Her presence in my life brought a renewed sense of purpose and joy that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. My home, which had been shrouded in silence for so long, suddenly felt full again. The rooms, once cold and empty, now felt alive with warmth. The dining table, which had often been deserted and quiet, became a place of laughter, chatter, and the kind of companionship I had longed for. Then, one day, I fell ill with a high fever. I felt so weak, so utterly drained, that I couldn't even summon the strength to get out of bed. I remember the dizziness that spun me into a haze, leaving me feeling like I was drifting somewhere far away from reality. But Emiko, without hesitation, stepped in like a guardian angel. She wasn't just concerned, she was deeply compassionate. Her care for me went beyond what anyone could expect from a friend. She prepared medicine, cooled my forehead with compresses, and even called my son, Yusuke, urging him to take me to the hospital. I was overwhelmed by her kindness. It wasn't just the act of care, but the depth of her concern, something I never expected from anyone other than family. Her actions left me humbled, and I realized just how much of a difference a truly caring person can make in your life. Even Yusuke, who had always been busy with his own life, was moved by Emiko's attentiveness, something so selfless that it truly touched both of us. At that moment, I knew that Emiko wasn't just a companion. She had become a vital part of my life, someone I could rely on when things felt too heavy to bear alone. Over the next few months, our bond grew even deeper. It wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but something even more beautiful and lasting, a quiet, steady companionship. There was a profound comfort in knowing that we didn't have to fill every silence with words. Our connection ran far beyond the conversation. Just being together, sipping tea, sitting side by side, enjoying the peaceful presence of one another, was enough to bring a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't known in years. We had created a rhythm, a dance of everyday life that felt right, that felt whole. But as with all things in life, nothing remains the same forever. One day, I received a phone call from Emiko's son. He was getting married and wanted her to come live with him. At first, I felt a wave of happiness for her. She was about to embark on a new chapter of her life, one that she had long deserved. I smiled and congratulated her, trying to mask the deep sorrow that was beginning to swell inside me. But in truth, my heart sank. I had known that this day would come eventually, but knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to bear. Emiko had become such a significant part of my life. Her absence felt like the prospect of losing a piece of myself. My world had brightened in ways I hadn't expected, and the thought of it dimming again left me struggling to hold back tears. The day she left, I drove her to the bus stop, where she would begin the journey to her son's home. I held her hand, trying to convey all the feelings that words couldn't express. Gratitude, sorrow, and a quiet longing for her presence to stay just a little longer. But even as I said goodbye, I knew that nothing could stop the inevitable. Watching her walk away, my heart shattered into pieces. I felt an emptiness like I had never known before, a void that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The house that had once echoed with laughter, love, and shared moments now stood silent, cold again. I returned to an empty home, where the stillness seemed to swallow me whole. The laughter, the companionship, the warmth that had filled the walls, now felt like a distant memory. I tried to fill my days with routine, morning walks in the park, brief conversations with neighbors, distractions. But with each passing day, the weight of her absence became more unbearable. It was as though a part of my soul had walked away with her. I've come to realize that this is just the way life works. The ebb and flow of relationships, the inevitable passage of time. The warmth that Emiko had brought into my life had faded, like the last remnants of a beautiful, fleeting summer. But life moves forward, whether we are ready or not. I carry her memory with me, tucked away in my heart, and I try to keep moving, to find meaning in the small moments of every day. Yet, the void she left behind grows ever larger, a reminder that the beauty of connection, no matter how fleeting, is something we can never take for granted. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. There were moments when I couldn't escape the deepening solitude that began to grow within me. Yusuke and Hana, my children, would occasionally call to check in, their voices filled with concern. But I understood. They had their own bustling lives, their responsibilities, families, and careers to manage. It's not that they didn't care for me. They did, deeply. But the reality was, they couldn't always be there. And I never wanted to burden them with my quiet suffering, with my loneliness that seemed to creep in with every passing day. So I'd smile and tell them I'm fine, masking the emptiness that quietly gnawed at my heart. But deep down I knew that my loneliness was becoming something more than just an occasional feeling. It was slowly seeping into my life, its weight pressing down on me like an invisible, suffocating force. The silence at night, the lack of companionship, it all became too much to bear. One day, as I was walking through the park, I overheard a conversation between 2 people about nursing homes. It wasn't the first time I'd heard such talk, but this time, something shifted inside me. I could feel the thought flicker through my mind like a spark. Perhaps this could be the answer I had been searching for. A place where I could find professional care, where there were people my age who could understand what I was going through. A place that wasn't a substitute for family, but perhaps a way to find comfort in a community that shared the same life stage, a place where I wouldn't have to endure the crushing silence alone. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like a relief, an option that offered peace without abandoning my dignity. It felt practical, even comforting, a glimmer of hope amidst the uncertainty of growing older. I called Yusuke, hoping he'd understand. As I shared my thoughts, I could hear the hesitation in his voice, a long silence stretching between us before he finally spoke. "Dad, wouldn't a place like that feel cold and impersonal?" His concern was clear, and it touched me deeply, but I could also hear the fear in his words, the fear that I was deciding out of desperation or loneliness. I could feel his love for me, even through the phone, and it stirred something inside me. But I knew what I needed to say. "Yusuke," I replied gently, "I'm not trying to escape my life or my reality. I'm not running away. I'm just trying to find a place where I can have peace in my later years. You and Hana have your own lives, and your own families, and I would never want to weigh you down with my needs. At least in a nursing home, I won't be alone. I'll have people around me who understand." I wasn't asking for them to be okay with my choice, but I needed them to understand that this wasn't a decision I was making lightly. After a few days, Yusuke and Hana came to visit, both of them quiet, unsure, but still caring. They sat with me in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. Then Hana, her voice soft and unsure, spoke up. "Dad, we're worried that this might make you feel even lonelier, not less." Her words stung, but I understood where they were coming from. They were my children, and they wanted me to be happy, to be surrounded by love. But I looked at them, my heart full of emotion, and I reassured them with the calmest tone I could muster. "Please, don't worry about me. I've thought this through. This isn't about escaping anything. It's about accepting where I am in life. I want both of you to live your lives freely, without guilt or worry about me. And I need to take responsibility for my well-being. I will be okay. I'll find peace here, in my way." Yusuke and Hana exchanged a glance, their faces etched with concern, but also with a deep, unspoken respect. It was clear that they were struggling with my decision, but I could feel them slowly coming to terms with it. They didn't want to let go, didn't want to accept the reality that I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that wasn't filled with family, but with a community of strangers who might one day feel like family. But they knew I was determined. Yusuke finally spoke, his voice quiet, filled with a mixture of understanding and sorrow. "If you're sure this is what you want, Dad, then we will respect it. But we'll visit often, and we'll make sure you're never truly alone." And in that moment, I felt a release. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my chest. For the first time in so long, I felt a sense of liberation, like I was finally taking control of my fate. A few months later, I moved into a city-run nursing home. It was nothing like I had imagined. It was nestled in a beautiful, peaceful area, surrounded by lush greenery and colorful gardens that offered a serene, almost sacred environment. The open communal spaces and tranquil surroundings helped ease my nerves. The residents here were all around my age, and something in me softened as I realized I wasn't alone in my experience. We were all in different stages of life, but we shared common ground, common struggles, and common hopes. And there was comfort in that. Comfort in knowing that others, just like me, were trying to find their peace amidst the challenges of aging. On my very first day, as I took a slow, deliberate stroll through the courtyard, I met Vuan, a longtime resident who had lived there for several years. He greeted me with a warm, genuine smile, and instantly, I felt a small but significant weight lift from my shoulders. There was something so reassuring in his presence, something that made me feel welcome in a way I hadn't expected. He offered to show me around the place, and as we walked together, he introduced me to a few of his friends, residents who had found their rhythm here, who had carved out their peace in this new chapter of their lives. I watched them interact, quietly and contentedly, and I saw something in them that made me hopeful. Something that whispered, "You can find your peace here too." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. This place, these people, they weren't a replacement for my children or my past life. But they were a chance for me to build a new one, to find contentment in a new community, and to feel the quiet joy that comes with accepting what is, without the bitterness of what could have been. That night, as I lay in the small bed of my new room, I gazed out the window at the peaceful view before me. The calmness of the night seemed to wrap around me, offering a soft comfort I hadn't known in years. There was a quiet here, gentler, more accepting, that whispered to my soul, assuring me I had finally found a place where I could breathe without the weight of my past. I had spent so many nights before in my lonely home, wrestling with an overwhelming sense of disconnection, but this room felt different. Though the surroundings were unfamiliar, they held a promise of peace, a promise that life at this stage could still offer something beautiful. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of belonging, surrounded by people who understood the subtle rhythms of aging, who knew that the quiet was not an absence but a deep, resonant fullness. As the days slowly passed, I found myself settling into this new rhythm, each moment of stillness a reminder that change, while daunting, had opened the door to a new chapter. There was a sense of calm in my heart that grew stronger with each passing day. 6 months later, I found myself marveling at the stability this new life had brought me. It was so much more than I had expected. It was a life filled with purpose and fulfillment, so different from the empty quiet I had left behind. Regular meals, a gentle daily routine of exercise, and the camaraderie of friends made this chapter feel steady and rooted. I even began to play chess again, something I hadn't done in years, enjoying the challenge and the quiet companionship it brought. I participated in communal events, exchanging stories and laughter, and suddenly, the loneliness that had once gnawed at me in my old home seemed like a distant memory, something that no longer had a hold on me. Yusuke and Hannah still called me regularly, their voices filled with love and concern, and each time they visited on the weekends, my heart swelled with gratitude. Their presence was a gift, a thread connecting me to the life I had once known. Yet, I made sure to reassure them, not wanting them to worry about me. "I'm doing well, and I have everything I need here. Don't worry about me. Just focus on your own lives, I would say, hiding the depth of my contentment and the peace I had found. But then, one afternoon, while basking in the sun on a stone bench in the peaceful courtyard, a call shattered the calm. It was Yusuke, his voice urgent and filled with panic. My heart seemed to freeze as he spoke. His words struck me with the force of a blow. "Dad, Emiko's been in a car accident. She's undergoing emergency surgery," he said, his voice tight with fear. I felt the blood drain from my face, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. Everything around me seemed to blur, and the peaceful afternoon felt like a lifetime ago. I couldn't grasp what I was hearing. My chest tightened with fear, and my fingers trembled as I gripped the phone. What? Is she okay?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would make the news even more real. Yusuke's reply was strained, his words coming too quickly. "I just found out and am heading to the hospital now. Do you want to come?" Emiko's face, her kind smile, and the sound of her gentle voice flooded my mind. I could still hear her words from our last conversation. "Take care of yourself." That simple, loving farewell now felt like a haunting, the memory of her warmth now threatened by something beyond my control. The realization hit me like a wave, and for the first time since moving into this home, the peace I had found felt fragile, like it could slip away in an instant. How could something so serene be so easily overshadowed by pain and fear? Overcome with a deep sense of helplessness and anxiety, I asked the nursing home staff to arrange transportation to the hospital. The ride there was a blur, my thoughts swirling with images of Emiko, so full of life, now fighting for hers. How could this happen to her? It didn't seem possible. The worry gnawed at me, each passing moment stretching out like an eternity. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw Yusuke and Hana waiting outside the emergency room. Their faces were etched with worry, their eyes red with fear and exhaustion. Yusuke gently guided me to a bench, his hand trembling as he held mine. "Dad, the doctors are doing everything they can, but her condition isn't looking good," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Each word felt like a knife to my heart, and I found myself staring at the red light above the operating room doors, a silent prayer rising in my chest. I prayed for her survival, for her strength, for the chance to see her again, for the peace that had once been my solace to return. Every breath felt heavy as I waited, hoping, clinging to the smallest thread of hope that would keep her alive. The doors finally swung open, and there he was, the doctor, stepping out into the sterile hallway, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the grim news he was about to deliver. His face was drawn, lines of exhaustion etched deep across his features. His eyes, once bright with the sharp clarity of medical precision, were now clouded with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Sorrow, perhaps, but also the quiet resignation of one who has witnessed too many losses. My heart pounded wildly in my chest as I rushed toward him, the fear and desperation clawing at my throat. My voice trembled, fragile and uncertain, barely more than a whisper as I asked, "Doctor, how is she?" He paused for what seemed like an eternity, the weight of his silence pressing down on me. His gaze softened, a deep empathy flickering in his eyes before he spoke in a voice barely above a murmur. "She's elderly, and the injuries are severe. We've done everything we can, but you need to prepare for the worst." If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. His words hit me like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile shell of hope I'd been clinging to. They tore through me with the ferocity of a blade, leaving me breathless and weak, my knees giving way beneath me. Yusuke, seeing my collapse, rushed to catch me, his arms steadying me as I fell into a nearby chair. My mind went blank as if every thought had been wiped away by the brutal weight of the doctor's prognosis. My heart, once full of fragile hope, now sank into a pit of overwhelming sorrow and helplessness. When they wheeled Emiko out of the operating room, it was as though life had been drained from her. leaving only a ghost of the vibrant, beautiful woman who had been my everything. The woman who had been a beacon of light, the one who brought joy and warmth into the darkest corners of my world. Now, she lay before me, pale and frail, her once radiant face almost unrecognizable. A coldness had settled in the lines of her skin, and the life that had once danced so vividly in her eyes seemed to have dimmed. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision as I reached out for her, my trembling hand seeking hers. "Stay strong, Emiko," I whispered through the suffocating lump in my throat, my voice breaking with the weight of my love and my fear. "You promised we'd face everything together. Please, don't leave me." For a fleeting moment, her eyelids fluttered. Just a tremor, a brief movement. But in that fragile moment, it was as if I could see the faintest glimmer of recognition in her eyes. My heart caught in my chest as I watched her lips move, but the words they formed were lost to the silence. A single tear, so delicate, slipped from her eye and traced a path down her cheek, and that tear, just one tear, broke me. It shattered me in ways I didn't know were possible. I knelt beside her bed, unable to tear my eyes away from the woman I loved more than anything in this world. I held her hand, my grip tightening with every ounce of strength I had left, as if by sheer force of will I could keep her tethered to this life. The pain of the moment was suffocating, like a vice around my chest. My voice cracked as I whispered, my words desperate, pleading, "Don't go, Emiko. I can't live without you. What will I do if you leave me? What will happen to me?" My sobs racked my body with such force that it felt like I might break into pieces. Hot tears spilled from my eyes, falling onto her cold, fragile hand. The contrast between the warmth of my love and the coldness of her skin was a cruel reminder of how powerless I was in the face of this tragedy. Every tear that fell felt like another piece of my soul being torn away, each one more agonizing than the last. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound that filled the air was the rhythmic beeping of the machines, the cruel reminders of the fragility of time and the preciousness of life. Each beep seemed to mark the passing of moments, moments that I wanted to hold on to forever. I couldn't accept that this might be the end. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, not after everything we had been through, not after the countless memories we had shared, the love we had built together. I refused to leave her side, even for a second. I kept my eyes fixed on her, praying, hoping, clinging to a fragile thread of hope that she would somehow make it through, that she would fight through this, that she would come back to me. But the hours stretched on, heavy with the unbearable uncertainty of it all, and the weight of what was happening pressed down on me like a crushing storm. That night, Emiko's condition worsened. The doctors told us that her survival was uncertain, that the chances of further deterioration were high, and that there was little they could do. Each word they spoke felt like a death sentence. The agony of not knowing if she would be taken from me, of not knowing if I would be able to hold her again, was unbearable. I stayed by her side, unwilling to leave, not even to blink, as though my presence might be the one thing that could keep her tethered to this world. Then, as if by some miracle, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, her eyes fluttered open. She struggled, weakly lifting her arm, but it was a struggle I could see drained her completely. Her hand, once so warm and full of life, was now cold, devoid of strength, of vitality. I held it with all the love and longing I had left, unwilling to let go, unwilling to accept that this could be the last moment I would ever have with her. My tears fell freely, each one soaking into her fragile hand, as if my love could somehow warm her, could somehow bring her back. Through the haze of my grief, I heard her voice, soft, barely audible, but clear enough to pierce through my heart like a dagger. "Masa-san," she whispered, her voice so faint, so fragile. "Stay well." Those words, those simple, selfless words, were the last she ever spoke. With the last of her strength, she closed her eyes, and the life drained from her, leaving me behind. I stood there in shock, my body frozen in place, unable to comprehend the finality of what had just happened. Grief surged through me, overwhelming me, crashing over me like a tidal wave. My chest felt hollow like it had been torn open, and I couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop pleading with her. "Emiko-san, please," I whispered hoarsely, holding her hand as if it could somehow bring her back. "Don't leave me. Don't go. Please stay with me." But there was no answer. The silence in the room was all-consuming, an unbearable void where her presence had once been. She had already gone, slipping away from me, from this world, leaving only the echo of her love and the unbearable ache of my loss. Emiko, the woman who had been my comfort, my joy, my world, was gone forever. And with her, a piece of me had died, leaving the world I had once known to crumble into darkness. I was lost, drifting in an ocean of grief, unable to see a way forward. In the days that followed, I was left to navigate life as a hollow version of myself, a mere shell moving through each day without purpose or clarity. Returning to the nursing home, a place that had once provided me with a sense of comfort and security, felt like an emotional prison. The familiar surroundings that once brought me peace now seemed suffocating, each corner, each bench, each quiet space echoing with memories of my time spent with Emiko. It was as if the very walls were drenched in the essence of her presence, and yet, her absence was now all-consuming. The silence that enveloped me was deafening. It echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of the part of my soul that had been irreversibly taken from me. The weight of that loss pressed heavily on my chest, and it felt as though I had been torn in two, with the broken pieces scattered somewhere I could never reach. The friends I had made at the nursing home, those kind souls who had shared this journey with me, could sense the shift within me. They saw the pain in my eyes, the way I had withdrawn into myself, but they didn't know how to help, how to fill the space I now occupied. Their presence, though comforting, was silent, unspoken companionship that seemed to acknowledge my grief without the need for words. And I, in my quiet way, appreciated their care. In a world that often demands action or words, sometimes silence can be the most genuine form of support. Still, that silent companionship, though kind, couldn't replace the voice of Emiko, or the laughter we once shared. As elderly individuals, we are uniquely aware of how fleeting life can be. We've seen enough to understand that the things we lose, whether they be loved ones, opportunities, or parts of ourselves, are gone for good. And with the loss of Emiko, I realized, more painfully than ever, that some wounds in life never truly heal. The scars they leave behind become permanent parts of who we are, carried within us forever. The sting of that truth is something only those who have lived through it can fully comprehend. Yusuke and Hana, my children, began visiting more frequently, trying with their innocent smiles to lift my heavy heart. They didn't say much, but their presence was an attempt to reach through my grief, to remind me of the love that still surrounded me. And yet, I couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of loss. I didn't want to burden them with the full depth of my sorrow, so I forced myself to smile, to laugh, to show them that I was managing, that I was fine. But those smiles were just facades, fragile masks that I wore to hide the deep, gnawing loneliness and despair that clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. The memories of Emiko-san, her gentle voice, her final words, the quiet way her eyes closed as I held her hand, remain forever etched in my heart. The pain of losing her, of being unable to protect her in those final moments, is a scar that refuses to fade. It sits in my soul like a raw wound, untouched by time or attempts at healing. I've come to realize, in the quiet moments of reflection, that some pains never leave. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much I try to move on, they remain a part of me. The ache of Emiko's loss is something I will carry until the end of my days. One afternoon, Yusuke sat beside me, his face etched with concern and sadness I knew he had inherited from his love for Emiko. He spoke softly, his words meant to comfort but cutting through the silence like a knife. "Dad, please don't be so sad anymore. Emiko-san wouldn't want you to be like this." The weight of his words sank into me like a stone. I could see the earnestness in his eyes and the desire to help, but I knew deep down that he couldn't understand. Not yet. Yusuke, I said, my voice rough with the weight of unspoken grief. It's not that simple. You're still so young. You might not fully understand, but when you lose someone like I lost Emiko, it feels like the sky has fallen, like the very earth beneath your feet has cracked open. It's not just sadness, son. It's as if a part of life itself has been ripped away. His words hung in the air, fleeting and powerless against the immensity of what I was feeling. There was a long pause, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing second. Yusuke, in his quiet way, seemed to understand. He placed his hand on mine, a simple gesture, but one that carried with it more love and warmth than I could have asked for. "Dad," he said, his voice steady despite the sadness in his eyes, "you still have us. You have grandchildren too. We'll always be by your side." And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, a small flame of warmth flickered within me. I nodded slowly, grateful for their love, but the emptiness in my heart was a chasm only I could feel. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "I'm grateful, truly. But this emptiness, it's something only I can understand." The next day, while walking through the nursing home's small garden, I noticed a man sitting on a bench, his face drawn and weary. He looked like someone who had recently moved in, his eyes reflecting a sadness that mirrored my own. His posture was slumped, his shoulders heavy with the weight of grief I knew all too well. He reminded me so much of myself when I first arrived here, burdened with a heart full of loss and nowhere to turn. I wanted to say something to him, to offer the same silent comfort that had been given to me, but instead, I simply watched him for a moment, understanding all too well the kind of pain he was carrying. I couldn't offer him solutions, but perhaps, in some small way, my silent understanding could provide the comfort he needed to know that he wasn't alone. I approached him slowly, carefully placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of unspoken words between us. "You're new here, aren't you?" I asked, my voice soft but inviting. "Would you like to walk with me for a bit?" He looked up at me, surprise flickering in his eyes, and after a long pause, he nodded silently. We didn't need to say anything more. Together, we began walking side by side, our steps falling in perfect sync, as though an invisible thread connected us. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. There was something profound in that quiet walk. As we moved forward, side by side, I couldn't help but sense that he felt the same silent ache I did. At that moment, words seemed unnecessary. It was as if the very act of walking together, two souls navigating the passage of time, spoke volumes. Among the elderly, loneliness is often a silent companion, a heavy shadow that lingers in the corners of our hearts. But here, in this space, there was a shared understanding. Even if we could not change the past or bring back those we had lost, we could find solace in the simple presence of others. Sometimes, just knowing that someone else understands the depth of your loneliness, even without a single word, can bring a quiet peace to the heart, a brief, comforting respite from the ache that never truly fades. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my mind wandered back to Emiko-san. Her face, soft and kind, seemed to hover before me, and I could almost hear her gentle voice, always so soothing and warm. Her smile had the power to melt the hardest of hearts, and her kindness. Oh, her kindness was a gift I would carry with me always. The memories of her were both a treasure and a sorrow. They brought a deep ache to my chest, a yearning for a presence that was no longer there, but they were also a balm for my soul. As I closed my eyes, I imagined hearing her voice again, quiet but firm, whispering to me as she always had, "Stay well and cherish those around you." Her words, though soft and distant now, seemed to wash over me like a comforting wave, easing the weight of loneliness, if only for a fleeting moment. Emiko-san's passing had left a vast emptiness in my heart, a hole that seemed too deep to fill. Yet, in her absence, she had left me with a lesson that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. A lesson so precious, so life-altering, that it made the pain of her loss feel a little more bearable. She had taught me to cherish every bond in life, whether it was the warmth of a friendship, the unconditional love of family, or even the brief, unexpected encounters that we often overlook. The fleeting moments of connection are sometimes the most precious, and we never know how much they will come to mean until they are gone. The next morning, as sunlight streamed gently through the window, casting soft beams on the nursing home garden, I felt a renewed sense of peace settle over me. The garden, alive with the scent of blooming flowers and the sweet songs of birds, seemed to hold a quiet beauty, a reminder of life's fleeting yet vibrant nature. In the stillness of the morning, I realized something important. Life, though fragile, is full of moments that can fill us with meaning if we are open to them. And though nothing in this world lasts forever, the people who pass through our lives leave an indelible mark on our hearts, footprints that remain with us long after they have gone. Their love, their kindness, and their presence live on within us, shaping us in ways we may never fully understand. And in that quiet moment, I understood that perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves is to cherish those connections, to hold them close, and to never forget the impact they have on our lives. As we come to the end of this reflection, I want to ask you, my friends, what have you learned from this journey we've shared today? Whether it's the value of silent companionship, the importance of cherishing the fleeting connections in our lives, or the quiet wisdom of remembering those we've lost, I hope these thoughts have touched your heart as much as they've touched mine. Take a moment and think about one thing you've learned today. How can you bring this lesson into your own life? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share with me one insight that resonated with you and how you plan to put it into practice. Let's inspire each other to live more intentionally, with gratitude and love. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more thoughtful reflections and insights. Thank you for being part of this journey, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments.